It's no secret that I love M. Night Shyamalan. He's my second favourite director, possibly first, and it's also no secret that he's had a very dotted past when it comes to his filmography. And though I am more partial to it than most, and I think a lot of people are far too harsh and let the internet or general socially accepted opinion control their views on it a bit too much, I can admit there are moments in his past that concern me also. Now, whether you think he's a terrible director or think he's one of the greatest is besides the point. At one point in his career, which was after his run of commercial and critical flops, the industry gave up on him and no producers wanted to touch him. In 2018, M. Night gave a speech at Drexel University where he said during the time of After Earth's release, "I find myself questioning myself and every thought that comes out of my head. The world of my industry decides I have no worth. I am a cautionary tale, a person who got lucky for a time but revealed himself to be a sham. I do not believe in myself." Painful words to hear from the man who gave us The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable and Signs one after the other, which are universally accepted classic movies. Now, after a time of not getting work, Shyamalan had some relative success on The Wayward Pines, which gave him a little bit of confidence that led him to making one of the biggest risks of his career. He took out a $5 million loan against his house. This loan would ensure one of two things: either M. Night makes a comeback and that would set him up on a path of goodwill for the future, or he loses it all: his house, his reputation, his career. Using this $5 million, he went on to make a movie. The movie this video is about, kinda. The Visit. Now, before I move on to the legacy of the film, its reception and where it took him, let's talk about the actual film for a second. So it's a found footage film which is extremely smart since it's super cost effective, but also it falls in line with Shyamalan's style, in that he doesn't have one. In my Hollywood's Biggest Enigma video, I mentioned that one of my favourite things about him as a filmmaker is that he constantly takes risks. For better or for worse, he's always trying something new. Whether that be a new genre, new concept, or new technique, he's always challenging himself and the audience. Sometimes it's a challenge on film as a whole, or just a challenge on what you expect from him as a filmmaker. So yeah, not only is found footage a sound idea financially, conceptually it's a new territory for him, which is exciting. Plus it's the complete opposite of what had put Shyamalan in such a ditch career-wise, which was big budget blockbusters like After Earth and The Last Airbender. What else I like about this decision is that it's given a kind of in-world explanation, which is that one of the kids is some kind of aspiring filmmaker, but more importantly, she wants to make a documentary about her trip because realistically it's a great idea for a documentary. Also, Becca serves as a surrogate for Shyamalan himself. She teaches her brother about filmmaking techniques and ideas, kind of like him teaching us as an audience how he approaches a film, but also it's like him rediscovering this himself, like this moment where Becca mentions that she's looking for the elixir, or teaching Tyler about mise-en-scene, or my favourite moment where she talks about needing visual tension. M. Night uses this concept all the time, searching for things beyond the camera to build suspense, using the wider world to imply more emotion in what we're directly engaging with and seeing. And when it comes to the narrative and how the movie works as a found footage film, M. Night deploys some very simple techniques to keep the time moving, and simplicity is what makes this work. Like the setup that the mom hasn't spoken to the grandparents in 15 years. It's a decent narrative device to keep the mother at a distance whilst giving us plenty of shots of her caring and bonding with her children to show that she cares. They also give the mother a place to be the majority of the time, which helps dramatically. And then we spoke about how Becca is a surrogate for M. Night, but the other kid, Tyler, works very well too. He's incredibly cringe, but like all kids this age are cringe, and the fact that he is so disgustingly weird adds a ridiculous amount of realism to the movie. Also, I was in this almost exact dynamic where I grew up with a slightly older sister. I have a lot of siblings, but I was only really close in age with one, and the sibling dynamic in this movie, how they act, talk, fight and care is enchantingly familiar. That's something people rarely pick up with Shyamalan's work. It's A, the sincerity, but also B, he is fantastic at family dynamics. That's most present in Signs, I would say, but almost all of M. Night's films have a flavour of it. As for the actual horror elements, it works just as a tight little story. The grandparents are so off-putting and weird in their first meeting. It comes off as nervous at first, but it is obviously a hint of something more sinister later on. And gradually as the film goes on, it's clear that the grandparents are scary, but in a way that is just playing on their age. It's their illness that makes them kind of insane. Aside from those little illnesses being triggered by the night, everything is relatively normal. But the normality of everything is exactly what offsets the horror. Now that's a fundamental of the genre, especially found footage. Everybody does it. It's a simple technique and nothing revolutionary, and that's exactly what makes this work for what it is. Another fundamental is set pieces, and in this film there are plenty, and of course the third act is brilliant. The nighttime scenes are the central focus of horror for the majority of the runtime, but there's this small moment set piece where the kids are playing hide and seek under the foundations of the house. This is a beautiful location for a horror set piece set during the day. It's like an inescapable maze and plays on something that is just inherently scary. Old people moving quickly. Plus, we already don't trust her at all by this point, so something that could be completely innocent or even really funny 3 scenes ago is now terrifying. The small moment where the grandma asks Becca to get in the oven is always insane. Though nothing particularly happens, you can see the grandma kind of itching to do something. Not every scene needs to be darkly lit, not every scene needs a jump scare, not every scene of horror needs to be gory or life-threatening. Sometimes just a simple scene of tension building through the mistrust of one character is enough, and M. Night masterfully demonstrates that. Also, as is usual with M. Night, the twist is pretty crazy and it always puts my heart in my throat. And not only is the twist amazing, but how M. Night handles it just better than anyone else would have is incredible to me. He keeps the camera on the grandparents and not the children. Their reaction is implied because you can only imagine your reaction is the same as theirs in that moment, just a face full of gross hesitance. A lesser filmmaker would have had multiple shots of the kids' faces reacting in this interaction, but M. Night knows how to make a simple moment memorable and unique. Like how he brings the concept of the kid freezing back round, which was told in an earlier scene, because as a director the man never loses his heart. Also, I love how every side character used to be an actor. It's just funny and it's nice seeing Shyamalan keeping his sense of humour that's always been present in his work. Anyway, the final shot where Tyler is rapping during the credits is super important. Though it's focused on him, Becca is finally looking at herself in the mirror, which was touched on in an earlier part of the film where she admits that it's hard to. It kind of feels like this is Shyamalan saying he's got his confidence back, he's back to doing what he loves and he can finally look at himself again. Now, I'm not going to go into every intricacy of the movie because frankly, it's not important. What's important is that after he made the movie, he shopped it around a bit and nobody wanted it. He made a couple of cuts until Jason Blum decided to pick it up along with Universal for distribution. The film was released in 2015, just 2 years after the context of his speech at Drexel University. And not only did it release to positive reviews and audience reception, it earned a whopping 98 million at the global box office, a profit of just over 90 million, meaning something major. This meant that M. Night Shyamalan was not only back, but he was ready to move forward in a way we could have never predicted. He took that 90 or so million and put it towards his next venture, Split, which cost 9 million, which is still very low but was wildly more ambitious than The Visit in scope and in direction and in writing and in concept. This also received great reviews, was a long-awaited sequel to his phenomenal Unbreakable, and was the biggest Blumhouse production box office wise up until last year's Five Nights at Freddy's with 278 million at the global box office. Meaning M. Night was finally back. Now with the freedom of funding his movies entirely himself, he was able to creatively control his visions without studio interference, which was arguably the biggest problem with his string of commercial flops. This trend continued. M. Night kept evolving, trying new things, self-funding and creating timeless pieces of works to the point where he's an independent titan and a name that means something again. And I love M. Night. I love who he was and I love who he is. I love what he represents, and his journey is something to be admired. Even if you don't don't love his work. And so he's releasing Trap this year, along with his daughter Ishana Night Shyamalan, who is releasing her directorial debut, The Watchers. Both movies look incredible and I'll be seated opening night for both. Glass and Knock at the Cabin are both in my top 100. Old is some of the most ambitious work he's ever done. Split is a fan favourite, and all of this is because of The Visit, a little low budget indie horror made by a guy who was on the verge of giving up. Now, if you want to hear me talk about M. Night more, I have a ranking of his films, which isn't so much valid anymore, but still, I have a video on Knock at the Cabin, and I have a video on M. Night himself, which nobody saw, but I'm incredibly proud of. But that's just me. Have you seen The Visit? Did you like it? Do you not? What do you think of this topic, this video? I want to hear it all, and whether it's one that aims to salvage the career of one of the most interesting auteurs in film history or not. As always, keep watching movies.